Hey, homeschool reading community. Happy Wednesday and welcome to this Facebook Live session. I'm so excited to be here today with Lindsay Leiviska from A Heart for All Students. We're going to be talking about all things ADHD, autism, learning challenges, and how to homeschool when we are struggling or working through all of these things. So I'm so excited to be here with Lindsay. She is just a wealth of information about all of these topics and a fantastic person as well. So just so excited to have her here. Lindsay, thank you so much for being here today.
Thank you, Sarah, so much for having me. I'm grateful, very grateful.
Yeah. Yeah, this is going to be so much fun. I have just really enjoyed getting to talk to Lindsay about just all things learning challenges and working through different challenges with our kids. And just, I'm so excited to be able to introduce you to her and to be able to talk with her today about all of these different challenges. So, Lindsay, can you just introduce yourself for people who don't already know you and tell us a little bit about what life looks like in your homeschool?
Oh, yes. Well, again, my name is Lindsay Leiviska, and I have been homeschooling for a little over 13 years. I have a 17-year-old, a 14-year-old, and a 9-year-old little boy. And when we first started homeschooling, well, I decided I was going to homeschool years and years ago when I was in graduate school to become a teacher. I decided, I'm not going to learn this and go do this somewhere else. I'm going to learn this and do this for my own kids. And fortunately, my future husband, agreed to the homeschooling thing. So we started that, and everything kind of went. I tried to do everything perfectly. Okay, I tried to do everything perfectly, and I was very traditional in my approach to homeschooling at the time, and my everything worked out pretty well until about 9 years ago when we adopted our son. He was a baby. We adopted him as a baby, but soon, about 18 months old, he started kicking, screaming, scratching, biting, hitting, couldn't sleep. He did not sleep for 365 days plus through the night for more than maybe 2 hours at a time. So my husband and I were deathly, I mean, it was awful. And it was years of zero sleep. And his behaviors were out of control. And nothing that I knew to do as an educator, as a good Christian homeschool mama, none of the rules, nothing worked with this child. And it's because of him that I had to relearn everything about the brain and behavior and learning and teaching. And so, long story short, after years of learning and just being shredded in everything I believed was right, I decided to take all that I had learned and start A Heart for All Students, because I realized in teaching some kids, I was teaching some classes. Eventually, I was teaching some classes. We did do classical conversations for several years, and I was teaching some students and noticed that my approach to teaching them radically shifted. So where behavior in the past, if I would see a boy wiggling around, I would think, oh, there's something wrong, or he's being disobedient or something like that, because that's often what we're told. But I realized that wasn't the case. And I started teaching my students differently, started tutoring a bunch of kids, and realized I could help more children if I helped share this with moms. And so that's where Heart for All Students was born.
That's awesome. I love that. I love that reminder that we are such good experts until we have our kids and then we learn the reality, right? I know
Right.
I've had that happen to me too. Like there have been times where I thought I knew something for sure, for sure. And
Yes.
then like my kids went through it and I'm thinking, wait, I didn't know. I didn't
No.
like this is so different than what I expected. And it's not, I mean, I didn't know. Yeah.
Yes. Yes.
Yeah. So what do you say to that mom who is looking at their kid and just kind of wondering, like, is this normal or isn't this normal? Are there certain things that kids struggle with that are normal, or like what are some common struggles that might give us a clue that maybe there's something more going on?
Oh, wow. That's a big question. So basically, I mean, I guess I'll start here. Let me start here. If you have a child that is consistently struggling to sit, to learn to read, to learn to take direction, to follow instructions that mom gives them, right? Then I recommend now, based on what I know, that we need to shift our thinking from disobedience and poor behavior and I'm a bad mom because my child's behaving this way and I need to do something about that. We need to shift our lens and really look at what's going on behind the behavior. Now, oftentimes as homeschoolers, I know for me, one of the biggest things I wanted to do to prove everybody wrong who was trying to tell me that homeschooling wasn't the right thing to do, was to get my kid to read, right? So the very first thing I did with my oldest, I taught my oldest how to read at the age of 4, and I taught my 14-year-old, how to read at the age of 4. Okay, I did that, but let me tell you this. They both have dyslexia, okay? And we do not have, an age makes a big difference. So I say all these things to say there's a bunch of variables behind it, and there's always a reason behind the behavior. So if you're consistently seeing patterns of struggles teaching your child how to read, getting your child to sit down. If you have a child who's highly emotional because they are being asked to do something that they don't want to do, there could be something going on behind the behavior. ADHD, particularly, or being autistic, a lot of people think of they have a very specific picture in their mind, but those diagnoses can look very different depending upon the child. And there's so many variables involved. So even if you don't have a child that's neurodivergent, so sometimes you'll hear me use the term neurodivergent, and that just means their brains are wired differently. And truthfully, we're all wired differently, but that's a term that a lot of people use to kind of target ADHD or autistic kids, dyslexic kids. So there's a lot to this question, because if a mom, maybe we can get into some of the other questions and then we can tease through, specifics of what to look for, because there's so many variables involved. And I feel like I'm flailing at answering this question very directly right now.
No, that's awesome. I think it's a hard question to answer because it really depends on each individual child, right?
Mm-hmm. Yes.
And it's difficult for us, like as homeschool parents. I know it's been difficult for me because I feel like there's not really a good basis for comparison. I can compare my kids to each other, but they're not the same age, so they naturally shouldn't have the same skills, right?
Yes.
But when we aren't seeing our child in a classroom with their peers or with a bunch of kids their same age every single day,
right,
then it's really hard to figure out what's normal and what's not.
Right. And to your point, I say that, as a believer, just as a human being that understands science, like, we're all designed uniquely for a reason. And so it's very artificial how we set up kids to be all clustered in one room together based solely on age instead of developmental level. And so I guess one of the first pieces of advice that I tend to tell people is we need to start thinking about developmental level and understanding child development and human development, and understanding that there's no linear pattern. Not every kid is going to develop in the exact same way at the exact same time in the exact same order. And so there's multiple variables involved. And so when we're talking about neurodivergent children, or children that just don't fit in the traditional box, okay, that we have designed just as a system, if they're not fitting in that box, there's not necessarily anything unnormal about them. They're just wired by God's design in a very unique way. And the great thing about homeschooling is the more we understand that child's wiring, the more we're able to support them with what they need to move forward. So my biggest thing is, for mom, is spend your time focusing on learning about the child in front of you, as opposed to the child that's the quote unquote benchmark child, because that benchmark child doesn't exist. That benchmark child doesn't exist. Your child's the most important one.
Oh my gosh, I love that so much. I love that because as homeschool parents, I feel like that's our advantage too, because we do know our kids really well. And so that's something that's going to come more easily to us than it would to a classroom teacher somewhere. But yeah, that's such smart advice, because it doesn't really matter what normal is. You don't have the perfect, normal, child. You have your child that is yours for a reason. And so, you can learn about your child and try to help them. So I love that. Yeah. That's so smart. So as we're going through and starting to sort of notice maybe some of these underlying issues, are there certain underlying issues that might be contributing, for example, to a child that is really struggling with learning to read? Let's talk about that, since we're in the reading group, right? If there's somebody that is struggling to read, what kind of underlying issues might be there that would be causing that problem?
Okay, so I just did a talk about, I just did a workshop called "Is My Child Lazy?" And I was talking about grit versus giving up. And I'm going to kind of pull from there because I listed a ton of underlying things that could be going on with a child. So if a child is struggling to read, well, what does struggling to read mean? Are they fighting you? Are they resisting you? Are they shutting down? Are they having a hard time, even memorizing? Are we having a hard time memorizing the sounds to the letters? Are we having a difficult time with just like basic phonics and understanding that piece? Are we having a hard time blending sounds together? How old is the child? So maybe what we could do is because there could be executive functioning issues going on, which is a huge piece to, executive functioning. If you want me to stop here, this might give some people some stuff to start chewing on right away. So typically when we talk about ADHD, autism, and quite frankly, anybody under the age of 25, we have to understand that there are a set of skills that we develop as human beings that are called executive functioning skills. And particularly with ADHD and autism, we tend to see a little bit of a delay or a pretty significant delay in that development. Doesn't mean that they're going to always be behind, but we are going to see some challenges or a little bit the delay in certain areas of executive functioning. If you take your hand and you put it on your forehead, the area behind that part of your forehead behind your skull is called the prefrontal cortex of the brain. So how we're designed is when we're born, this part of the brain is not fully developed. It grows with us, right? So that's the part of the brain that's responsible for executive functioning skills, like sustaining attention, initiating tasks. We would call it like task initiation. Working memory. Working memory is a term that a lot of people hear. Working memory is the ability to take information, hold on to it in the kind of like the holding place, the landing place within the brain, long enough to manipulate it, put it together and make sense of it, and then do something with it. So all these skills, self-control, emotional regulation. So if you have a child that's really quick to melt down or you hurt my feelings, or just you have some children that, in the past we'd use the term they're being dramatic or they're exaggerating. I don't buy that anymore based on what I know behind the science. That there has to do with your executive functioning skills. And that's one of those skills, emotional regulation, because in different experts will have 7 to 47 different things that they cluster under executive functioning, but I'm going to keep it smaller. But that's an area of executive functioning. This part doesn't develop in the human brain until the age of 25. In children with ADHD or autistic kids, that's not going to be until even later, closer to 30. Okay. So understanding this, and there's my dogs, understanding this can help us better shift our expectations for what we think is appropriate for our child, if that makes sense. Understanding that there is potentially a delay. And quite frankly, even a neurotypical child, a lot of what we expect from children is inappropriate for how they've been designed and how they're wired. So we have to shift our expectations based on understanding the skills that they have, if that makes sense, in a particular developmental period of time. So working memory, that's a huge area. So if you have a child that has memorized all the sounds, can say act, but they can't put together cat, that could be related to challenges with working memory, because by the time they've sounded out all of those sounds, they may have lost the k before it's time to put them together. So that's a working memory issue. It could also be, there could be some language processing issues, even working memory, even if their working memory is good enough to keep the word cat together, but by the time they get to the end of the sentence, they cannot tell you what that sentence was. They forget it. So maybe you have an older child that's struggling with comprehension. They're not being lazy. They're not paying attention. They're using their cognitive fuel to decode. And by the time they get to the end, they may not, they've used all their fuel. So the working memory just went out the window, and that's why they can't make sense of it, for example.
Mhm.
So
Yeah.
there's so many different reasons. I mean, I could keep rambling, but I'll let you, if you have a question.
Yeah, I love that. I see that so often with the working memory and with all kids, not, not just kids that are struggling with one or more of these issues. I think
Exactly.
that just the process of learning to read takes so much working memory that is a really common struggle for everybody.
Yes.
And the clue that's really funny, but kind of makes sense that this is happening, that I see in a lot of kids, is they'll come up with a word that has something to do with the last letter that they blended. So if they're blending at to make cat, then they're going to remember that ending T sound, right? And then
Yeah.
they're going to come up with like turtle or something like that.
Wow.
So that's your clue that the working memory is the problem.
That is so
Yeah.
interesting. That is so
Yeah.
interesting. Yes. And then, I know that you have a lot of parents with younger kids, but they might be in a similar situation as me, that the other thing with like comprehension is we really need to make sure that the child is actually processing language. So you might have a child who can decode. Okay, so this is kind of what happened in our home. So with my 17-year-old and my 14-year-old, both of them being dyslexic, and they're doing great. They do well with reading, but they were easy readers. And they were easy readers. And I was like, check, I'm the best homeschool mom. My kids are reading. I have done it. That's it. I'm done. Peace. We're out. We did it. And then I realized, oh, no. Just because a child can, let's get these dogs out of here. Just because a child can decode words does not mean that they're making sense of them. It doesn't mean that the brain is, we're all homeschoolers, right? We're all homeschoolers. I'm going to text my 17-year-old and say, get the dogs out of my room. Thank you. Get them out. Get them out.
Yeah. Life is happening.
That's what we do. That's why we homeschool,
right. Yeah.
Right?
No, I was trying to calmly yell to my kids in the next room a few minutes ago. So if you saw that,
stop talking.
Yep.
Stop
Exactly.
Get the dogs.
Life happens.
Yeah. Oh, by the way,
Yep.
I have ADHD too. So, I own this loud and proud. I didn't even know until I was 41. So that's a whole nother story we could always get into. I will tell moms right now, here's just a little piece of advice. If you have a child with ADHD, there's a good chance you have ADHD or daddy has ADHD, because it's like 81% heritability rate with ADHD. 81. Wow. Like the biggest heritability rate there is, 81. Now, does it like hurt me? It's all about how it's impacting your life. And it's actually one of my greatest skills. There's incredible benefits to having that kind of brain. Some of the most successful business people have ADHD. Some of our most successful business people are autistic. So don't buy the lie that there's something wrong. It's just, you're going to have to really take this child, understand this exactly how this child's wired, and then go from there. It's going to be, and it's not easy. I'm not lying. But anyways,
I love that. Can we just stop there for a minute and just let that sink in for everybody? Because I feel like that's like the first gut reaction, right? Is that when we start to realize that something is going on and that maybe there's some sort of deviation from like the normal, perfect child, then, our first reaction, at least mine, is like guilt and like, oh no, I've broken them. And like, what is this? What is their future going to look like? Have I ruined them forever? Like, is something seriously wrong? And I feel like it's so important just for us to remember that like these are not weaknesses. These are just how our child was designed. It's different, but there are strengths that go along with it as well. And so we really need to keep that in mind as parents.
Amen. So. Yes. And part of that, you guys, this is why we homeschool, because the system does not serve all children. And so if we just look at even the perfect child. Guys, the perfect child that's sitting perfectly and doing everything and that's obedient, that child, you may not see the issues, but if that child's learning that compliance is the only way to survive in this world, what happens to that lady, that girl that learns to be compliant and quiet when she's 30 years old and she needs to advocate for herself, right? So meaning every single one of I truly believe this, every one of our strengths in every person, because we're just people, every strength can be our greatest weakness. Every one of our weaknesses can be our greatest strength. So your child's ability to bop, 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 and be distracted by all things. Yes, it may be more challenging to teach them, but there's a way to do it. And that child's going to be highly motivated by something. And that's your key to, that's going to be your fuel to teach them, is use the things that are inherently interesting. Because the people, like a lot of people with ADHD and a lot of autistic people, they have the ability to hyper focus on areas of interest, which is why they end up being very, very successful. Unfortunately, we're told that, oh, well, my kid loves Minecraft and that's where he's hyper focusing and that's bad. No, 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 no. That's not bad. God put that child in this time, in this season for a reason. And the blessing is we can use Minecraft to increase dopamine. I haven't even talked about dopamine yet. We can use their inherent interests, because things that are interesting to us by God's design release dopamine, the neurotransmitter in the brain that helps us to maintain attention and helps us to motivate and move forward in the things that we are working towards. So if we use, I love the fact that there's all these, I'm using Minecraft as an example. It could be Legos. It could be Beanie Boos. Like let's learn about Beanie Boos. Let's collect all of our Beanie Boos and put them into different categories. And I don't know, I'm kind of rambling. What I'm trying to, my point is use your child's interest to drive learning. That's just a little piece.
Yeah. Yeah, I love that. And reading as well, because I mean, it doesn't matter when we're teaching our kids to read. I feel like it's more important that we get them to love books and get them excited about reading, no matter what it is that they're reading. And so if they're reading, the Minecraft guide manual or whatever, or like the tags on the Beanie Boos, great, they're reading something, and then once they become fluent readers and start to really like reading, then you can start to introduce them to the classics when they're older.
Yes, exactly.
Yeah, I love that. Okay, so we talked a lot about ADHD sort of in a general sense, but can you just tell us what that is and how as parents we might know if our kids have it?
Well, of course, let me preface this by saying, so we can have a legal disclaimer, I am not a doctor. I'm an educator, I'm a researcher, and I have a neurodivergent family, and we are very proud of that because that's our strength. But I will tell you this. If you suspect that your child has ADHD or is autistic, I want to start with this. We use language in our world to describe clusters of behaviors and signs and symptoms, okay? We do that because by understanding that there's a general pattern, we can gather more information. ADHD as a diagnosis, I'm not big in pathologizing people and labeling people for being who they are. That's just not healthy, but that's just the world we live in. So all that to say, you can choose to look for a diagnosis or not. I personally believe that a lot of parents would just bring themselves so much more freedom if they understand the underlying stuff with ADHD and treat their children as such, because most children are going to show signs of different ADHD type symptoms at some point. And so just understanding that will help. But ADHD really in general, while the DSM-5, so there is a diagnostic and statistical manual. If you were to go to a doctor, okay, and they would, if you'd actually go to a psychiatrist or a developmental pediatrician, they'll use the DSM-5 to tell you does your child check off the boxes for ADHD. But the diagnosis and all the information, the criteria is very poorly done. Most experts in ADHD, so you can look up Dr. Russell Barkley. I have a list of all of these fantastic books that I have learned from about ADHD, but I'll just use, and there's Dr. Daniel Amen, real experts in ADHD tend to focus more on the challenges with executive functioning. So all those I'm going to use the word self-control, the ability to self-monitor. Oh, I need to stay on task because mommy wants me to get this done. Being able to initiate tasks, have emotional regulation, keep themselves, composed when appropriate, all that kind of stuff. That's typically what's related to ADHD. It's going to be related to executive functioning challenges or delays. There's the classic. There's technically 3 different types. I have an article on my website about the 7 types. I think it's much more helpful. It breaks down different qualities, things. Some kids that have ADHD get really focused on what they want to do, and they get really mad if you try to stop them from doing it, right? That's a presentation of ADHD. Some kids are all over the place. Some, a lot of times in girls, they're going to be hyper talkative. Okay. They're going to be super all over the place. Some girls do present a little bit differently. And I have a whole thing about women and girls on my website as well. But, and then we've got the boys that are bouncing all over the place. But again, at the end of the day, it's really about how does it impact your life? To me, how does it impact your life? How's it going to impact my life, my child's life as an adult? Because my goal is to get them to adulthood. So you can have ADHD, you can be autistic as an adult and be thriving and be thriving when equipped well based on who you are. So a lot of these kids, Dr. Barkley talks about the fact that with ADHD, we use the term attention deficit hyperactivity disorder, but in reality, it's one of the most poorly named diagnoses because it's not that the ADHD brain doesn't have focus. It's actually, it has attention to everything. So if you imagine it like a filter, the filter isn't working as well. So what happens is all the input, all the sensory input, all the stuff that your eyes see, all the stuff that you hear, the brain is getting it all at once. It's actually an issue of too much attention. The brain is receiving too much attention and can't filter it out. And so that's what causes distractibility. That's what causes emotional overwhelm because their brains are being sucked dry of capacity because everything's coming at them at once. So all that to say, that's typically emotional regulation is a big issue. So when I say emotional regulation, I mean that ability to control those big feelings that come up, or the feelings come up really fast. And oftentimes it's just because the threshold, the filter, the brain has been processing so much all day that the filter and the amount of fuel left is very, very limited. So we see a lot of these same things with ADHD and in autism.
Mm-hmm. I love that analogy about the filter. I feel like that's really helpful in understanding
Yes.
just how the brain works and sort of the differences that are there. I love that.
Well, yeah, and because we think about it, one of the biggest things you think about with kids with ADHD, what they're hearing their whole lives are pay attention, pay attention, pay attention. And they don't have the words to say, I am paying attention. Everything's coming at me right now. What do you want me to pay attention to? Because I can't shut it out. So this is when getting support and understanding ADHD really helps to overcome and to work through some of those challenges.
Yeah, that makes sense. So can we talk a little bit about the support and getting support? I know that that's a really important piece. So maybe we've recognized some of these symptoms in our kids and we've decided either to get a diagnosis or just to sort of explore on our own. What would you recommend that parents do to really start to get that support for our kids and to really be able to equip them to be successful with the brain that they have?
Yes, I love that. Be successful with the brain that they have. Yes, accept that. Okay. So the first thing I would recommend is that moms do a real inventory of the beliefs that you have about your job as a parent and really start to examine the expectations that have been placed on us as parents and on our children, and to start really putting them up to the light and really deciding, are these healthy and appropriate for my child at this time? Because what often happens is that we feel all this pressure. First of all, we're homeschooling. So we're already doing something different and we're already raising a flag that we're like, we're doing something different here. So we're already drawing attention to ourselves because of the fact that we homeschool, even though at this point, like everybody I know homeschools. So I'm like, that's homeschooling's the thing to do. Hello. But I know that feeling. And as a mom, we feel all this pressure. We feel pressure. Oh no, I'm behind. Hurry. We got to get going. Why aren't you paying attention? Why aren't you doing this? Oh no. And we have all this internal baggage that we have to deal with. For me, it had to start with me. And that is so hard. It's so hard. So for me, it was checking the expectations, learning as much as I could about the brain. And that's why I placed like all these books that I have used to really help me understand, and also understand that God has chosen you to parent this child for a reason. Meaning your child's designed exactly how they're supposed to be for a reason. That if you're a believer, if you're not a believer, that's fine. But just know that there is a plan for your child to be successful, and they will be successful. But we need to radically shift our own thinking and start at the beginning. And so oftentimes that's going to be working with the brain your child has. So if you have a wiggly worm, I talk a lot about the right sensory input. Children that are all over the place and have a hard time focusing, whether or not your child has quote unquote sensory issues, we all have sensory issues. We're all human beings. We all have 8 sensory systems. Okay. So using movement, use lots and lots of movement. Always use movement if your child is a mover before you have them sit to learn. We can talk about, if you want to talk about the different types of sensory input, I could go through that real quickly because I do find it to be extremely effective regardless of the child. I mean, regardless of if there's a diagnosis or not, it doesn't matter. But we have the 5 sensory systems that we all know about in school, right? Taste, touch, smell, sight, all that kind of stuff, and hearing. And then we also have 3 others that we're aware of. There's one, interoception. Interoception is the ability to really sense what's going on in your own body and be able to say, oh, I'm hungry, or, oh, I didn't get much sleep last night and I'm exhausted. That's interoception. But for right now, we'll focus on the 2 others. The 2 others are proprioception and vestibular. So we've got a proprioceptive system in our body, and that's the part of our body that by design. So if you close your eyes and you put your hand in the air, your brain knows that your hand is in the air without visually seeing it, right? So it has to do with joint position. And it also, we give ourselves proprioceptive input through deep pressure. Okay. So it has to do with joints and pressure, and that the brain understands that it's getting this type of input. So the wonderful thing about proprioceptive input is I want you to think about going to get a massage. Women love massages for a reason, because when we get that deep pressure, the brain starts to release serotonin, and serotonin is a feel-good chemical that's extremely calming. So if you have a child that loves big hugs and squeezes, if you have a child that's constantly banging into walls, or maybe a child that's like wrestles and accidentally hurts people, maybe you have a child that whacks people. So this is very, very common. You'll hear about your kid and somebody will say, so-and-so hit me. And they're like, and sometimes they don't even realize they hit somebody, right? Or they like whack someone, but they're not mad. They're not upset. It was just like a instinctual thing. And what that is, that's the brain most oftentimes telling the body, I need to calm down. Give me that deep pressure. So if you notice your child banging into people, likes to do push-ups, all the things I just kind of described, that's a clue that they need that type of input to calm and focus. So that's the type of start trying to incorporate that stuff into your day when they're starting to get wiggly and crazy, or before you start with schoolwork. Is really, I talk about couch sandwiches, just a little tip. If you have that child that's constantly banging into things, we do couch sandwiches. You just take a cushion off your couch, you have your child lie on the cushion, take the other cushion, put it on top of them, and then sit on it. Now, obviously you do it safely, but that feeling of pressure does release that calming chemical that helps them to focus better. There's another type of input called vestibular input, and that has to do with like if you flip upside down. So you could flip upside down and your brain knows you're upside down. Or if you're on a roller coaster and you go whoop and you go woo, and you kind of feel that in your tummy, your brain knows like my body is moving through space. Okay. That's vestibular input. That type of input you'll see a lot with kids that are flipping cartwheels, a child that loves to go on the swings. So if you have a child who resists the swings and that was never big on going on the swings, that's your clue that there's something going on in their vestibular system that makes it frightening for their bodies. It makes it too much for their bodies to get that type of input. Doesn't mean that there's anything necessarily wrong. You just decide if that's an area you're concerned about. You kind of put together all the pieces and get a bigger picture. But the thing about vestibular input, so going on the swings, riding a bike, anything going through space, if your child is young, is little, and you can still put them on your shoulders, you can run around the house with them on your shoulders, just anything that's getting their body and their head moving, anything that gets them handstands. So if you do handstands, you're inverting the head. What this does is it releases a chemical called histamine. Histamine increases alertness level. So some of our children that have more of an inattentive type of ADHD are the ones that are like, look, a bird, or like have no energy. So you can have ADHD where there's no bouncing off the walls. You can have that inattentive type where the brain doesn't have enough stimulation to pay attention. That child might do well to play on the swings, ride their bikes, anything that's moving their head upside down, because it will release histamine in the brain, which increases alertness level. So just some different ideas.
I love this. I love that there's so many different explanations for some of these behaviors, because I think as a parent, it's so easy to see these behaviors happening or see that child that just isn't paying attention, even though you've asked them 3 or 4 or 8 or however many times, and they still haven't done the thing. And it's just so easy as a parent to sort of go down the road towards disobedience and think, well, I've told them and I've told them and I've told them and they're not doing it, so that must mean that they're being disobedient, and then to, start to punish. And it's helpful to be able to hear that maybe there's a deeper reason for some of these behaviors that we can be looking to, and really trying to, give our kids those outlets and those strategies to be able to handle these behaviors in a way that, helps them set them up for success. So I really love that. That's awesome.
Oh, I do too. And to your point, this is the other thing that I talk about a lot is like these kids, if you look at the statistics, they say, I don't know what it is. It's like, I think it's by the age of 7 or 11. You'll have to forgive me. We can look. It's on my website. But I think it was Dr. William Dobson. He's an expert in ADHD. And there's some statistics that says that our neurodivergent kids, these kids receive it's like 10,000 more negative messages by a certain age than other children. So, and if you look at the statistics for these children, drug abuse, car accidents, pregnancy, just the mental health statistics of what we have been doing in the past is not working. And what we have been doing in the past was doing a lot of shame-based, it's your fault, you're doing something wrong, you're making a bad choice, you're willingly doing this. And that's not working into adulthood. So I appreciate you bringing this up, because it brings the point up is that our children will be adults between 75 and 80% of their lives. So what they believe about themselves is what they hear consistently in childhood. Those are the messages they will take with them, and that will stick with them into adulthood. And we all know this because we're those children that are navigating some stuff where our parents, they meant to do well. They just were passing on what they knew. But when we know more, we can do better by God's grace, right? And so focusing on that relationship with your child, I talk about a lot in my book and in my course, the difference between control and influence. And a lot of times, especially in our homeschool world, we feel this pressure to control our kids' behavior. You better get your kid under control. You better nip that in the bud, right? That's just shame. And where does that lead us? That leads us to try to control someone who was never meant to be controlled, because, again, this is a faith piece, so forgive me. I want everyone to feel welcome. But like, as a believer, for me, it's like, well, Jesus came to me through relationship. And the reason that whole sanctification process happened, right, is through safe relationship. But if there's no relationship, we have no influence over our children when they get older. And so I found that equipping my kids and teaching them, you need proprioceptive input today. My boy knows, I need deep pressure. I need squeezes. I need to go on the swing. Giving them these tools helps them to not feel bad about themselves, understand who they are, and embrace it. Right. So it's anyways, thank you for bringing that up.
I love that. Yeah. And I love that you've taught your son to be able to recognize those needs and be able to advocate for himself. I think that's so cool. Whether you choose to get a diagnosis or not, I think it's important to, especially in this case, to help your child understand the way that their brain works and to be able to advocate for their needs. So I love that.
Yeah.
Yeah. Can we switch gears a little bit and talk really specifically about homeschooling? Because I know that, we've got that context going on, right? So
Mhm.
we have to be able to teach these kids in our homeschool, even though they've got all these other things going on. So are there like specific ways that some of these challenges could impact learning? And then are there specific strategies that we can use to really set our kids up for success as they're learning or in that homeschool context?
I mean, yes, one thing, and we kind of talked about this as far as like just preparing and understanding that movement really does matter for a lot of these, quite frankly, for almost all kids. Movement matters. Movement matters, I was going to say, going on the trampoline, instead of sitting at a table doing math problems, go on the trampoline and use those flashcards while they're on their trampoline, or, spell words while they're jumping on a trampoline or on the swing, read to them while they're moving. Again, in homeschooling, we have the benefit of being able to do that. Now, everyone has different resources, different space. So you're going to have to come up with what works best for your specific situation. But understanding that it's going to look very different. That's the thing is I always recommend that parents for homeschooling and objectives, focus on your goal. So in this lesson, okay, so a lot of, if we have a traditional workbook or something, and if they have a piece of paper with 50 problems on it, your child is likely going to, oftentimes a child that's that exhausted because their brains have been receiving so much information throughout the day. I have to think, is my goal to make him do 50 problems, or is my goal to help him learn this concept and be able to do this, and to be able to do this in the real world? And so I often recommend that parents limit the number of problems, oftentimes limit the number of problems, because focus on the goal. And is the goal for the child to write? So a lot of our kids that are neurodivergent in some way, they may struggle with integrating penmanship. Okay, so integrating penmanship with working memory to remember the math problems, for example. What steps do I need to take to do this math problem? Not only do I have to know the steps to do this math problem, now I have to integrate a relatively new skill, which is writing. Okay. Because we think, oh, they've been writing, they can write. Yes, they can write, but it doesn't mean it's fluent enough for all these things to integrate together. So always think during language arts time, okay, if you're doing your reading lesson, and I know you could do it for math, you can do it either way, but we'll just talk about language arts. If you're doing language arts and you just worked through, you did your reading time with mom, if you did reading better together and you guys sat, you read your book together, right? And then the next step, maybe you have a workbook, or you're using Explode the Code, or whatever you're using for maybe some extra phonics practice. But if your child is struggling with integrating writing, or maybe they have dysgraphia, take the pencil away from them and you do it orally, write it out loud, and ask them to spell aloud to you. Quite frankly, spelling aloud is a huge area of learning, because you're using the auditory, you're using the language part of the brain to process in the speech part of the brain. It's actually just as helpful and effective, and maybe even more effective for your child to have to say it out loud and hear themselves say it out loud. So always think, what's the objective? Is my objective that I want is my child doing handwriting practice right now? Or is the objective this spelling pattern, right? So I don't know if that helps at all, but for me, it's always, what's the objective? And really keeping in mind, has my child been in speech therapy 3 times this week? Has my child also been struggling? Have they had doctor's appointments? Start looking at your child like as if it's a cup of energy every morning. Most people wake up and it's up here, but these kids, it's already down here by 9 o'clock. They've been up for an hour and everything's coming at them. So less is more. Oftentimes, I try to tell parents, less can often be more. Less over time. So do 2 math problems. Do the same concept 2 or 4 or 5 problems a day. Over time will add up and will make it much more effective. And you will get much farther if you back off and slow down and do less than feel like you have to follow the curriculum. if that makes sense. Does that even help at all? I don't know.
Yeah, I love that. I love that recommendation to do less as well, because I think that so often when kids have meltdowns with schoolwork, it's because we've tried to push them
Yeah.
beyond what
Yeah.
their attention span was and what their ability to focus on that was. And
Yeah.
so, and if we're doing that consistently day after day after day, then they start to learn that reading or math or whatever subject is a chore, and that it's always going to take forever and be exhausting. And so over time, then those meltdowns that happen at the end start to happen at the beginning, because they start to remember from the day before and the day before
Yes.
that. So
Yes.
if we can just do a little bit less and stop while they're still, enjoying it or participating willingly, and,
Yes.
try to cut it off before we hit the meltdown phase. I
Yes.
think that can really help our kids to be able to, build that stamina because they're enjoying it more.
Absolutely. And it builds confidence, and it builds confidence, and
Yeah.
confidence, let me tell you, confidence raises the fuel. Confidence raises the fuel. If you're confident in your ability to do something, you are much more motivated. Your dopamine in the brain, which is a huge area with ADHD, one of the major neurotransmitters that is also related to the ADHD type behaviors, dopamine being low or dysregulated. Let's just say that, because it's very complex. But when a child is successful, that increases dopamine, that motivates, that's the motivating neurotransmitter. That helps us to get things done when they're hard. Because we know as adults, there are things we don't do because we are done and we are spent. It just happens a lot earlier for our kids. So it's helpful to see it in ourselves. But confidence creates momentum, creates dopamine, creates momentum. So amen to that. That was good. I like this.
Yeah. I love that.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And the other thing about your books too, just because I wanted to say this, just like as a tip, also when a child sees like a worksheet or a text with lots and lots of words on it, so a lot of times they'll melt down, right? Oh, it's too much, I can't do it. And we want to be like, you can do it. You did it yesterday. Okay. It doesn't matter what they did yesterday. We got to go with where they are at today, right? So here's the thing. Here's the other thing. When a child's looking at a bunch of text on a page, okay, the brain, a lot of times with these kids, especially with dyslexic kids, well, autistic kids, so many kids struggle with controlling the muscles that control the fine motor skill of eye tracking. Okay. And if there's a lot of text on a page, your child could, first of all, have a hard time. The brain is getting so much input that it shuts down. So the brain has to tease through a bunch of information. So what I like about like your books that you use is that there's less text on a page for a child, so the brain doesn't have to tease through, what am I supposed to look at, right? They're not doing it consciously, but if there's lots and lots of text on a page and your child does struggle with tracking, and when I say tracking, I mean going left to right, it's very, very common. It's extremely common, parents, extremely common. This is a fine motor skill. Eye tracking is a fine motor skill. Controlling the eyes is a fine motor skill. Here's a tip. If you're reading with your child and then they pick a word from the line below, or they skip a word, that's a clue that there might be some tracking issues. Does that mean it's like the end of the world? No, you can do exercises to focus, it's not the end of the world, but it's a clue. Take that math problem and put it on a white piece of paper. Look for books, or increase the size of, if you use Kindle, as your kids get older, look for books or strategies or ways to increase the size of the text so that the brain doesn't have to tease through as much information at one time. It frees up fuel for the brain and helps your child to be more successful.
Mm-hmm. I love that. Yeah. Another thing that I like to do is take a sheet of paper and put it over the next line.
Yes.
So I have The Monster at the end of this book. One of my favorite books ever.
I have that book.
It happens to be sitting here. And so like if we were reading this, it's not a great book for this, but it kind of
yes.
But if we were reading this, we would cover up all but the first line, and then we would read the first line, and then we would scoot our little paper down one line, and we would read just the second line, just to kind of make it a little bit less
overwhelming.
Yes.
Yeah. So good. So good.
For sure. Lindsay, this has been awesome. I feel like we could talk for like the next 6 hours here,
Yes.
just about kids and about learning. And you are just like a wealth of information, and I really appreciate that. Is there anything else, like before we end here? Is there anything like last minute things that you want to tell the moms, or just like encouragement for us today?
Just to just when it's really bad and you're having a hard day, just remember relationship first. And I know that seems cheesy and fuzzy, but I'm telling you right now, the greatest strength that we have as parents is our ability to influence them. And when they feel safe with us, they want to please and they want to work with us and they want to do well. And they feel like I'm valued enough that my mom wants to have this with me. So I can just say from my experience, relationship first. When it's just a yucky day, relationship first. So let's just play a game. Let's play a board game. Let's just create sweet memories, because when we create sweet memories, we bring down stress levels and we create patterns in the brain that are peaceful and not that don't lend themselves to triggering reactions and feeling stressed out. And I don't know. And there's Charlie in the background rubbing her. That's the dog. We say she's traveling to China. Oh my gosh, sorry.
That's
just,
awesome.
Just laugh. Just laugh. Life is too short. And now, do I blow it daily? Of course, or at least weekly, multiple times a week. I blow it, but there's grace for me too, and there's grace for all of us. So we're all in it together at the end of the day.
Yeah. Yeah, I love that so much. I feel like it's so easy to get so focused on the curriculum says that we're supposed to do lesson 3, all of it today.
No.
And like, who cares if we do lesson 3 today or tomorrow? It's not going to matter. But building those memories with our kids is really what's important. So I love that. That's so smart. I know that you have some things to share with our group, and I know that everybody here is going to want to connect with you and get all of the resources. So can you tell us where we can find more?
Yes. If anyone's watching this video, it's hilarious. The dog. I think she's like literally like trying to get to China through my bed. Sorry. Okay. See, that's
so too.
That's my ADHD right there. Like, okay, well, too bad. All right. So you're going to come find, I would love to meet you. My website is aheartforallstudents.com. I do have a freebie, a cheat sheet, like an homeschooling ADHD cheat sheet that I have given Sarah. I've given you the link to, so you can share that with them. But I also have
all of these links are linked in the description of the video. Go ahead.
Yes. And I was going to say, I have multiple courses, but I put one course, Homeschooling the Distracted Child. And it's where I kind of dive deep into a lot more of like the science and the reasoning behind this type of stuff, kind of taken a lot of the years of research that I have done and condensed it down so that you can go ahead and take it straight to your house and start applying it and feeling more confident in your ability to teach your child differently based on the child that you have. So that's a very inexpensive course that you could take. And I have a Facebook group on that I'd love to, everyone's welcome. And I'm all over, social media and all the things. So at A Heart for All Students, A Heart for All Students.
That's awesome. Thank you. Yeah, there's links to the Facebook group, the course, and the ADHD cheat sheets, all in the description of the video. So definitely go and check those out, because all of those are fantastic resources. So
well, thank you, Sarah.
Thank you so much for being here today, Lindsay. I know I learned so much. I learn from you every time we talk. And it's so much fun to get to connect and just be encouraged about how to equip our kids really for success. So thank you for that.
Yes, absolutely. I'm so grateful. You have no idea. This was like the highlight of my day. Before I got on here, I was like, I was having a day, girl. We're all homeschooled. I'm being real. I was having a day. And so I'm so grateful for this opportunity to just chat with you. Really, it was the highlight of my day. So thank you.
Well, thank you. And thank you so much to everybody who's watching. Again, if you have questions for Lindsay, feel free to drop those in the comments as well. And I will make sure that she gets those and gets a chance to respond. So thank you so much, everybody, and have a wonderful week. We'll see you later. Bye.
Bye.
I hope you enjoyed this video, which was recorded live in the Homeschool Reading Community Group. This is a free Facebook group where I share tips and advice about homeschooling and teaching reading. You'll also find community with other homeschool moms like you, plus freebies, giveaways, parties, and more. I would love for you to join us over at the Homeschool Reading Community. Make sure that you check out the link in the description of this video for all the details.